Count your joys instead of your woes. Count your friends instead of your foes. Count your courage instead of your fears. Count your laughs instead of your tears.
The greatest and untapped resource in Canada, and in fact in the world, is the collective wisdom of our elders.
We're not going to undo ageism until we undo ableism. Welcome to Elder Wisdom Stories from the Green Bench. This is episode number 69. We are so pleased you are here with us today, and as usual, we have an informative and entertaining interview ahead, full of wisdom, of course. I'm Kathy Buckworth, and as always, I have the pleasure of sharing the bench with my co-host, Evelyn Brindle, who lives at the village of Erin Meadows in Mississauga, just one of the Schlegel Retirement and Long-Term Care residences. Evelyn, so nice to be chatting with you again.
Yes, hi, Kathy. It's good to be back together again.
It really is, and we have such a fun guest today.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. I'm eager to hear about our guest's travel adventures today, and especially since we've done a lot of traveling with our daughter living for the last 30 years in Hong Kong. So we've gotten to see a lot of the world we never expected to. And it'll be fun talking with Christine about all of her adventures.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the travel talks as well as the teaching aspect. I have a ton of teachers in my family, so really looking forward to getting into that as well. And before we start, I'd just like to remind everyone what the podcast is all about. It's the brainchild of the Schlegel family, and it's long been founder Ron Schlegel's belief that the greatest untapped resource in Canada, if not the world, is the collective wisdom of our elders. And today, we have some great wisdom to be shared with us from Christine Runstedtler, who's a resident of the Winston Park Schlegel Village in Kitchener. Christine is quite impressive, wouldn't you say, Evelyn?
Oh, definitely. And I know she's had a lot of fun traveling to all the wonderful places she's been. That's always been, traveling and teaching seem to go hand in hand because you learn something from every trip you take.
And I know Christine is standing by right now. So Christine, hello, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here.
We're very excited to have you. And I'm going to ask Evelyn to launch right in because she has some great questions just to get to know you a little bit before we get into our conversation.
Okay. How are you doing today, Christine?
Very well. Thank you, Evelyn.
Yes.
And you're a resident at which of the parks?
I'm at the village of Erin Meadows here in Mississauga.
Okay.
Yes, and I know you're probably enjoying it there. You've been there for 4 years, I understand, and I've been here for 5.
It's almost 4 years to the day.
Yeah, great. And why did or what motivated you to travel?
Oh, well, I've always liked to travel. I guess when I was young, we did it with my family. We always took day trips. My father could drive for hours and hours and hours. My mother didn't drive, but he could drive from one day to the next without any sleep. So we would take very long day trips. And I suppose that's what got me interested at, when I was old enough, I became the map reader. That was always a function of the children.
Right.
And it was quite an honor to be given the road map.
I always had to do that too, and you learn quite a lot from doing that, don't you?
I still like road maps. I always have road maps when I'm traveling.
I think they're a lot more interesting than GPS, but GPS does help through a lot of
That's true.
areas.
That's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. Do you have any favorite destination that you may have visited?
Oh, that's difficult because I've been so many places. Um, I think the most interesting and different one was to Java and Bali
Oh,
because we were escorted by a pair of brothers who were actually American, but they had lived in Indonesia for years and years and knew a lot of people and were also involved in the arts. And so we were invited for private performances of, for instance, the puppetry, the dance, all of their arts.
oh,
And
that's
since I
wonderful.
like that kind of thing, it was wonderful to see that.
Oh, definitely. What an experience to be part of that. Yeah,
You
those
felt
are,
all like the family, really.
yeah. Yeah, you know, when you travel to a lot of those places and they're so welcoming, I have found. And they include you in a lot of things, you know, sometimes even just family and having a little cup of tea or whatever. But yeah, that's one of the wonderful experiences of traveling. And
Exactly.
And
yeah.
Christine, you're not just a traveler, of course. You were a teacher for many years, and you managed to sort of integrate those two loves. What can tell me a little bit about your journey into teaching, and what did you teach, and how long did you teach for?
Well, my journey into teaching, uh, not sure. I was never a person who said, I want to teach,
Hmm.
from little up. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But as time went on and things developed, I did get into the teaching profession. I started in, I guess it was 1961.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell how old I am. Um, and this was secondary school teaching, mainly English, uh, some history, 1 year of vocal music, but mainly English. And then I got into teacher librarianship. This was later on in my career. So, I put in my 35 years because at that time it was still the 90 factor,
Mm-hmm.
and they retired after that.
You started teaching in 1961. I think you said things have changed a lot in the school system. Kids have changed a lot. I know, I think I read that you are wishing for the return of some more formal teaching methods. Could you explain what you mean by that? What do you think students maybe are missing out on today?
Well, for one thing, they better teach them how to how to read uh, the written
Mm-hmm.
uh, words, because they're going to miss out on a lot of things they can't read. I have not the nieces and nephews, but the great nieces and nephews who can't who can't read the little notes I put on their birthday cards. They
The
have to get their
cursive writing, you mean?
parents to
Yeah.
read them. You
Yeah, the
know,
cursive writing isn't being taught really anymore. I think I heard that they're bringing
it,
it back, but you're
they're
right. There's a
going to
whole
bring
group
it.
of students.
They're
Yeah.
going to bring it back. Apparently, yes.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah, that I think that's a loss as well. I mean, obviously, it's important that I took typing in school. Now it's keyboarding, I guess. But yeah, it's really important to learn cursive writing. So, different students have different learning styles. Different teachers have different teaching styles. How are you able to adapt your teaching methods when you're, to reach those students that were learning differently?
You mean how you have a group, say, of 30 or
Hmm.
35 kids? And,
Hmm.
well, you have to hope that the majority of them understand what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
Uh, and you just work with the others. I don't think that teachers of my generation thought that much about, well, Johnny needs a special lesson here, and Evelyn needs something different there. We just hoped that they were getting it, and if they didn't, gave them some extra help.
Yeah,
but
no,
we didn't
exactly.
quantify or qualify all of these things. We didn't have to write reports about how they reacted and what they did and so on. The reports came when the report cards came out.
So we know that what brings students together sometimes, Christine, is extracurricular activities. And I think you were probably involved with those. What kind of an impact do you think those have on students?
Oh, I think they're tremendously important.
Mm-hmm.
And but they have to be set up so that the students are aware that they must commit themselves. I remember this was when I was at my first school, and it was known for doing uh, Broadway musicals. So we had done some Broadway musicals, and then the one year it seemed as if the students really weren't that committed. As the teachers, we felt we were dragging them out to rehearsals and so on. We said, this is ridiculous. I mean, this is supposed to be for them, not for us.
Right.
So the following year, when they said, what show are we doing? We said, well, we're not. The teachers have decided to take a sabbatical, and you go ahead and decide what you want to do, and you have enough experience now. Some of the senior students had been in the programs doing these musicals and plays and so on. So they chose a play. They're not a musical. They figured they couldn't handle that, but they chose a play, and they had their director, and they had their rehearsals, and they did not badly at all. But the next year they came to us and said, please, won't you come back so we can do a musical?
What a great learning experience for them. Well done. I understand you also took your students. I love the Stratford Festival. I understand you took your students there. How do you feel that really it sort of got them more engaged in the arts?
Oh, it did.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had a kind of in at Stratford, because as a student, as a university student, I had worked as a box office girl at
Nice.
the festival for a couple of summers. And so I knew a number of the people, and I was able to take smaller groups up, and they would give them tours of the whole place and let them play around on the stage, and they'd let them take the swords and have sword fights and so on. And I can remember a couple of the boys. We were doing 12th Night that year, and they went up on the balcony, and they are declaiming. And this is just something wonderful that they were able to do. But now, in terms of taking students to the performances, we used to do that as well. I think I took 8 bus loads. So,
wow.
What, 8 times 50 would be about 400 kids.
Oh,
Is
my
that
goodness.
my math? Is my math right?
It is.
Anyway, we would go up for the entire day. In other words, we'd see a matinee and an evening performance. And between the two, I said, you're on your own. We're not going to follow you around or say where you have to go to have dinner or not. Just don't fall in the river. And we teacher chaperones went on our own. And I can remember coming back. We were coming back for the night performance, and some of the girls came charging up and they said, "Oh, Miss Runstedtler, we saw Bruno Gerussi. He gave
Oh,
us a
wow.
ride back to the to the theater." And they were so excited. It was really kind of fun.
When you traveled internationally, was it on your own or with any other group?
Well, as I say, it was with anybody who happened to be signed up. My first international trip, I think, was with my mother. She was wonderful to travel with. And as she got older and not able to do it, then I would go with other groups. That one I found in the newspaper said they were going to China, and it was organized by a man who had worked at the university. And I phoned them up, and it sounded interesting, so that's how I got going with them. And after that trip, I traveled, I don't know, 3 or 4 more trips that he organized, but it wasn't always the same people.
Right. And that makes it a lot interesting too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. What international countries did you go to besides Indonesia and Bali, for example?
Oh, well, a lot of places in Europe. In the East, China and Indonesia, Thailand was another one we did in that area.
Were you there in Thailand, you mentioned? Were you in Bangkok?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Bangkok, beautiful city.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And then we took the river cruise up northern Thailand and traveled there. Very, very interesting. Lovely people. And when we were in China, I think maybe that Peter may have mentioned this to you. As I said, we were in China twice. The first one was 1987, and the second one was 1991. And when we were traveling in the first one in 80, what did I say?
87.
87. Of course, you always have guides to take you around, and because there is a language problem, and so every place you stop, you have what they call local guides, and they take over. And when we were touring the first time, most of them were university students, some of them graduates, and a lot of them asking us if we could arrange for them to come to Canada to continue their studies. It was very interesting. And they talked so freely about their country, what they didn't like about it, and this is terrible and we're going to change this, to the point where I said, should you be talking like this to us? Can't you get into trouble if somebody overhears what you're saying? Oh no, they said, it's all changed now. It's never going to be like it was. We're not restricted. We can, do anything we want, say anything we want.
Yeah.
Well, then we came to Tiananmen Square. 89, I think that was. You remember that, when the students were revolting and they brought in the tanks and so on.
Yes.
Then, when we went back to China in 91, the atmosphere was completely different. They were still very polite, very knowledgeable, but they didn't talk as freely to us as we had had in the previous trip. So finally, when I got to know the one guy, you also have a country guide who goes around with you. And when I got to know him a little bit better, I told him what it had been like on the first trip. And I said to him, I think things have changed since then. Oh, yes, he said, we have to be very careful what we do and what we say. And in fact, as we progressed through the country, the second one was east to west. The first one had been north to south. But we were about as far west as we could go and still be in China. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the city. But anyway, we had to stop there so that the proper licenses could be issued, that we could go so close to the border of this. It was one of the stands, Uzbekistan or.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I thought, okay, well, we're all going to have to go get something stamped. No, it wasn't us. It was our guide. He had to be approved to go. They didn't care if we went and got lost in the mountains or went over the border and so on, but they kept track of him. And he said, I've got a wife and baby at home in Beijing, and yet they are suspicious that I'm going to try to leave the country.
Yeah.
So there'd been a complete turnaround in the way that they were now living. The pressure was back on, which was sad. It really was sad.
Yeah, very much so. I've seen quite a number of tour groups from China coming into Hong Kong and then going to Macau, and the security around them. I mean, even when they'd stop and give a smile to the child that was with us, the guards would come right up and make them move on. And so, that it has changed considerably, and even more so now, especially in Hong Kong. Did you ever incorporate your travel experiences into your classroom teaching?
Yes. Interesting. I told Peter about this situation. This is after I had started into the teacher librarianship, and I was the teacher librarian at the school. And the geography department, I think yes, it was the geography teacher. He would bring his students down so that I could, tell them about my trips.
Mm.
And the one year, where the heck had I been? It was somewhere with camels. Maybe we may have been in Africa or in Northern Africa. And I had been telling them about the camels, and I just said to them, you've heard of the straw that breaks the camel's back. I said, well, I think that came from the noises the camels make. They sound as if they're complaining. And I kind of made the camel sound. And they go, well, Well, anyway, then they all got back to work on but anyway, then another student came in about 15 minutes later. He'd been called to the office, so he was late coming. And he came up to me and he said, "Miss Runstedtler, will you make the camel noise again? I wasn't here for it." And I think most of the integration came through what the teachers asked me to do. Again, when we were traveling in we were going to be traveling in Western China, and there's nothing but sand out there, and just all different kinds. Pardon?
No, I think you're good.
All different kinds of deserts. Like I think of a desert as a kind of homogeneous layer of sand in some place. Well, they have deserts within deserts. And one geography teacher had asked me, he says, "Can you collect when you stop different places? Can you collect sand for me?" And I looked at him and I said, "Sand?" And he said, "Oh yes." He says, "It's quite different in different places. So if you could, collect some of it, I can use that in my teaching." So this was back in the days when we still used film, and we had the little canisters that held the film.
Right.
So I would, take a canister, fill it with sand, label where we were and the date and so on, and seal it all up. And by the time I got back to Canada, I had quite a few of these. And he was right. The sand was quite different in different places. I hadn't realized this before.
Yeah.
But anyway, when I got to the customs, somebody in the group said to me, "You're going to be in trouble." I said, "Why?" He says, "That's sand." I said, "Well, it's all sealed and so on." But he was right. They pulled me out of line and said, "Come over here," And the lady who was looking at my declaration, I had put down that these were the vials of desert sand, and this for a collector, and that they were all sealed. And she looks at me and she says, "What is this desert sand you're bringing back?" I refrained from giving her a spelling lesson. But anyway, I explained that this was sand that a teacher was going to use, and all the little canisters had been sealed and so on. And she said, a little crestfallen, because she realized what she had said.
She wanted some dessert.
She says, "Oh, well, as long as you're not going to sprinkle it around the rose bushes." I said, no, this is going sealed as it is to the teacher. So it was funny, but she was certainly protecting Canada, because, of course, you're not supposed to bring in anything like that unless it's sealed.
Well, one thing you could bring back, of course, is your experiences and your learning to the classroom, which is so invaluable for kids. I know I've traveled with my kids, especially when they were younger, and tried to visit historical places that fit with the curriculum, so they could really sort of see, history come to life. I took my kids to the Churchill War Rooms in London, and we had just previously been through the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So when we got to the Churchill War Rooms, my son, who was about 10 at the time, said, "I think they could have done a better job with this display." Which was, and he didn't realize that it was real. So yeah, taking them with you when you can, but also bringing back those learning experiences to the classroom is really invaluable. And what's also invaluable, of course, is that you sat on the green bench at the Kitchener Public Library and shared your wisdom with the community. What was that experience like for you, Christine?
Well, I'm not sure that I shared a whole lot of wisdom.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
Well, we were there for a couple of hours, and the first hour we talked to a few people who were, in the library. One couple was interested in knowing about the homes where we lived and so on. Unfortunately, um, there weren't a lot of people in the second hour. We more or less talked to ourselves, within ourselves, but we learned a lot.
Yep, you can learn a lot talking to amongst yourselves. The
That's
green
right.
bench. The green bench is a physical, representation of people coming together and sharing wisdom. Why do you think that's important to have that sort of that symbol?
I don't know, because I for the longest time didn't know exactly what they meant by the green bench
Okay.
and what it was supposed to do. Like when I'm talking to people, I don't feel that well, except my nieces and nephews. I don't feel as if I'm instructing them, or showing them my wisdom. We're just talking. Um, I find it a bit presumptuous to say that I'm sharing my wisdom.
Well,
I'm,
even today, the facts you've been sharing about, we used to use paper maps, and used to let the kids go off on their own and Stratford and things. These are social history, pieces of wisdom that get lost sometimes, and it's always, I think, very interesting for people to hear about how life was basically. And you were sharing wisdom sometimes without knowing it. We don't realize what other people know, and I think that's what you're great at, Christine. You're a teacher.
oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I like talking to people to hear, what they did and how they
Yeah.
reacted and so on. Yeah.
Well, you have such an interesting story to tell with both your travel and your teaching. So, while we're talking here, you said you weren't sure what the green bench was. This is obviously part of the purpose of this podcast is to share wisdom and to invite people to the green bench. So, as we're chatting here, we like to pull out pieces of wisdom from our guests, and I promise this won't be painful. But I'm just wondering, what key takeaway would you like the listeners to this podcast to remember about the importance of teaching and the arts?
Well, I hope that when you say the arts, and I'm, of course, located in Kitchener. I don't know where you guys are, but I'm in Kitchener. And we've had some terrible blows to the arts. First of all, our symphony orchestra, which has been a standby for years and years, and suddenly just vanishes. They just pull the rug out from under them. We have a museum that's teetering on the brink, and somehow we have to make evident to our basically industrial city. We've always been known for the industry in Kitchener. That this is important. It started, I think, because of the large German population which settled in this area. The place was known as Berlin,
That's right.
obviously, at one time. But they also were very much involved. They'd have their Sanger fests and so on. They were involved in the arts. So they brought that along with their industry. I'm not sure that that's happening now with the blooming of all the technological and digital age, and somehow the arts are being forgotten. I hope that we can stop that and
Yeah, and I think
bring these back.
And you're taking students to Stratford, and us making sure that we take our kids and grandkids to performances is really important, I think, to keep that going. I know you have the center and the square in Kitchener, don't you, where they put on some performances. So yeah, I totally agree with you that this is going to have an effect on the next generation. Don't you agree?
Yes, unless we get the arts back. Now, the center in the square was built largely for the orchestra
I didn't know that.
and the organizations that would put on shows. Now they bring in shows. Unfortunately, that's what they're doing now to keep it open. They're just bringing in road shows, which is fine. It introduces people to certain kinds of arts, but to have it here, to have the um, ability to join in. I mean, there was the junior orchestra. My brother played in the junior orchestra when he was in high school, and other young people have, and that's how they got in. Then, of course, they had the junior orchestra, a whole entity in itself, aside from the senior orchestra. So it's giving your young people a chance to get into it. A road show doesn't do that.
That's true.
It comes in, it performs, it leaves. But it's there's not the lasting effect.
That's true. And so many of these programs aren't even available in school anymore. It's not part of their education plan. And
so much of music has been cut. You're right.
Oh, yes, unfortunately. And art, painting.
Yes.
The history of all of that as well, which enriches every person's life. And we keep losing more and more of that. I totally agree with you that we need to get
I have
back
to ask
to
you
that and have the values.
Sorry, Evelyn.
It's okay.
I have to ask you this question, Christine, just before we wrap up, because I know you were an English teacher. I'm a writer. I'm a big reader. What was your favorite book to teach and why?
Oh, golly.
That's a tough one, right? Like your favorite niece or nephew. Don't choose.
There was a lot of excellent literature available, and if you're also thinking what kind engaged the students, books like Lord of the Flies, Death of a Salesman, those you could get to touch the students because they were within their scope of life. They knew what salesmen were and so on, and they knew how kids could fight so that friends became enemies, and those were not the only good ones, but they just spring to mind because I remember we were doing Death of a Salesman, and I was doing it with a 4-year class. I was teaching back when there was the streaming in the 5-year, the 4-year, and so on. And the 4-year was supposed to be, relatively non-academic and not terribly interested in those kind of things. That was the theory. It wasn't really the truth. But I was having students read certain parts of the play. And this one day we were at the part where Willie, the salesman, is just so frustrated. And everything is coming at him suddenly. He's not selling as he used to. His family keeps nagging him at about things. And he starts to say, shut up, shut up, shut up. And the student who was reading that part was one who would always choose a back seat in the room and very rarely volunteer anything. He would answer if you asked him, but didn't seem engaged. But something about that got to him, and he did it as if he were on stage. And later at noon hour, the teacher who had the room next door came up to me and he said, what's going on over in your room? He said, I could hear somebody yelling, shut up, shut up. And it sounded so desperate. And he said, I came out and walked up the hall to your room. And he says, there you are sitting on the desk looking calm. So he decided I wasn't being attacked. So he didn't come in. And I told him, I said, what you have just said, I am going to tell that student, in front of the class, because he did such a marvelous job. He was so engaged, and you would never think that of a student. And he hadn't had any rehearsal. I just said to him, will you read this part today? But somehow he got into the whole stream of things.
Well, I can't think of a better way to finish this episode. What a great story, and what a wonderful teacher you must have been. I wish you were my teacher. It sounds fantastic.
Mine too.
Oh, I don't know.
Right?
I was tough.
Tough can be good.
I ran across a quote that I think is so typical, or really shows you that travel is the only thing you buy that makes you richer, and it certainly has been enriching for your life and also for all of us here today. And you've certainly given us a lot to think about and to enjoy. Thank you so very much for being with us today.
Well, thank you. I've never heard that particular quotation. It is so apt.
Isn't it? Yes, I definitely think so. And it really typifies you and your experiences.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, I can't believe it, ladies, but we are at the end of another episode of Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench. Thank you so much, Christine, for sharing your stories with us today. We learned a lot. And on behalf of myself and Evelyn Brindle, I'd like to thank you for giving us the chance to share these stories with our audience. If you're listening and you're joining us for the first time, the good news is you have 68 other episodes to listen to. We'd love to have you subscribe to our podcast, of course, if you already haven't done so, but we'd also love to hear your words of wisdom on social media. Please do using the hashtag #ElderWisdom, which will also help others to find us on this green bench. And we do love a review and a rating on the podcast as well. You can easily find it by going to elderwisdom.ca and following the link. Take a look at the Elder Wisdom Pledge Against Ageism while you're there, and please think about signing us. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Kathy Buckworth, and along with Evelyn Brindle, we look forward to sharing some more elder wisdom with you on the next episode of Stories from the Green Bench.
Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench, is brought to you by Schlegel Villages, a complete continuum of care, offering independent living to long-term care, celebrating and honoring the wisdom of the elder. To learn more about us, please go to our website, schlegelvillages.com.